Check, 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 check. One, two, three. Sure. I think it's off right now. Are you getting a buzz or anything? Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, you can test this out if you want.
Testing, testing, testing.
As close as you're comfortable getting.
Is it? Test, test. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Good. It might be. Is it a little high or it's good?
It should be good.
Okay, okay. Awesome.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie Valkacek, the director of IAD. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're so excited to welcome our guest speaker today, Sarah Len. She has over 10 years experience in the design industry, working for major heavy hitters like Ken Folk, Avroco, Restoration Hardware. She's also the founder of her company, The Len Co. She's been described as one of my favorite nicknames as a hired weapon by the industry members. And she essentially specializes in bringing teams together, managing large projects, connectivity, and vision to execute these large-scale projects with lots of different players involved. So as students, often you're working in a very isolated environment, sometimes on your own project individually, but in reality, you will most likely always be working with a larger team, and there's a lot that goes along with that beyond design. So how to communicate, how to work together, how to create a connected vision. And we're so excited to have Sarah here today to talk about some of the insights that she's gained, give you some tips. And I encourage you all to please be thinking of questions for her as she's talking. She's very open to questions. She'll pause during her speech to open it up for questions. So don't hesitate to ask, and I will run around with a microphone and make sure we can all hear you. And I would also like to say welcome to everyone online who is joining. This is being streamed online as well. So if you have questions online, please go ahead and type them in the chat pod, and we'll be sure to get to them. So without further ado, please join me in providing a warm welcome for Sarah Len.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. Super excited to be here. Just to kind of get a read of the room, what years do we have in here? Is this a mixed bag? Mixed? Okay. And has anyone had any internships yet? Back here. Any positions with any firms? Right there, okay. Great. So I'll start by giving you a little bit about my background and how I became so interested in this topic of design and leadership. I graduated with a master's in architecture from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, which is also where I grew up about 10 years ago. And I had done my undergrad in global studies, and I've always had a fascination for understanding people, how people think, how people work. And I pretty quickly got interested in not only the design, but how the design gets done and the humanity of design. So I started, when I came to the Bay Area about 10 years ago, one of the first things I did was I was the project manager for the Bay Lights project, which is the art installation on the Bay Bridge. Has anyone seen that from the Embarcadero? Yes. Good. If you haven't, it's a must-see. Which was an incredible project to be a part of, really transformed my mentality about what is possible. As you can imagine, we'll talk more about that later, but that was a project that kind of defied a lot of reality and rules, and now is a big part of of the fabric of our city. So I went on to project manage with Restoration Hardware, and from there have had several leadership positions in design firms you may know of. As you mentioned, Ken Folk, which does fantastic work here in San Francisco and is now in New York. Avroco, which is headquartered in New York but has a studio here in San Francisco. Really focused on hospitality design, which tends to have a lot of moving parts and a lot of players and a lot of coordination amongst all of those people. So throughout my career, I've developed some tools that I believe really help in aligning people keeping people inspired and motivated and thinking and looking at things differently. And I would urge you to think about leadership as a mentality and a mindset and not as a position. There are a lot of people in leadership positions with titles that may not have leadership qualities, and vice versa. So even starting your career as an intern, as a junior designer, anyone can embody leadership qualities. And it really has been a big differentiator for me in my career, helping me get to places that I can really shape projects in a way that's very impactful. So a little bit about like, what is design leadership? What does that even mean? Leadership is kind of a buzzword now. We're hearing a lot more talk about it. But essentially, design leaders are people who, when all is shifting, which it does constantly on these projects, and there's a lot of unknown, they're kind of the beacons of clarity and bring purpose for the team, so everyone knows where they're going. It's the ability to create and realize inspiring solutions, especially in the face of complex or changing situations. And I think of it as equally strategic as it is intuitive. So really kind of tapping into your gut instinct is a really big part of bringing leadership to projects. And why does it matter? As a leader, you are creating a framework for which designers can orient their thoughts, their practice, and their process. And it's about inspiring and aligning a team while steering the design towards the best possible outcome, which is really the goal for everyone. I like to emphasize just on this is design is not this like free-for-all, and it's not magic. Sometimes people think it just happens, and it happens through great ideas, but that's a really, really small part of it. The success of a project is just really dependent on the process and the way in which you navigate that process and the different perspectives that are invited to the table. It's got a lot of different moving parts. So I think great leadership really is about asking the right questions, inviting in these different points of view, encouraging people to flip ideas on their head, looking at the unknown, and it just makes for a more meaningful and rich outcome. So just for anyone who you know, hasn't really been in a design firm and understand how design firms are structured, typically these are the positions that you'll find in a design firm. And there's more or less, but some of the leadership positions can be a managing director, a studio director, which tend to be more on the operations of the whole studio, and then a creative director and design director, which tends to be more project-based. Sometimes you'll have a project manager and the designers, but oftentimes the designers are expected to bring project management skills. Depends on the size of the firm and the way that it's structured, but having some kind of, I call them project leadership skills, and I'll explain a little more why I choose that language, but those skills will be really important in you kind of differentiating yourself in a firm. So I don't believe that leadership is about management. I don't really think people like to be managed. I think people like to be inspired and led. And so I change my language. Anytime I structure a team, I call it a project leadership position. I think it can be a lot more than task lists and schedule management and budgets, which tend to sound a little dry, and everyone runs away from that responsibility. I think of it as being informed, and as an informed designer, you can make better decisions. And anyone can develop leadership skills. So again, this is not for a position, this is for anyone in this room. And so here I'm just going to share with you 10 different fundamental truths that throughout my career I feel like have been really impactful in design leadership. I'll also say, so there's 10 points, and you'll see each one is numbered, so they're really clear. At the end of each one, I'll pause, and if you have questions, just shoot your hand up. I want to keep it conversational, and I want to make sure this is clear. At the same time, some of these might not even feel relevant right now for where you're at, but if you have questions or need examples, just shoot your hand up. And I hope, for me, sometimes when I hear something, it just sits in the back of your head, and at the right moment, at the right time, when you're on a project, maybe that will pop up and be useful to you at that point. So the first one here is one of my favorites, which I really believe in, is that authentic leadership comes from your values. Values shape design. It's the key to purposeful and connected creative work, and ultimately, I believe, how you create inspired spaces. So when you're on a project, I always ask the team, what is the point of doing this? Spaces impact people, and why do we create the spaces that we do? An example of this is if you value social equity, then accessibility is going to be important on your project, which means that it has a price of entry or a price point in which most people can afford to come. So that value starts shaping the design decisions. It's going to affect your budget, and through there, it's going to affect the material selection and all of the design decisions you make thereafter. So it starts with the value, and then the design follows that. Yes?
Can you just, like, very briefly give us a breakdown of, like, what the process is? Because we have a creative director and a design director, and so I'm thinking, when do the designers come in? Like, what's the process of the beginning? Say you get the client, and then a creative director does what, and then the designers do what?
Sure, okay. Good question. It's different for every firm, but I'll tell you a process. Yes, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, what is the process? You're awarded a project, and how does that kind of funnel through the different positions, and what is the role of the designer within the project? So I'll tell you kind of how most often I prefer a project to go. So oftentimes there is a lot of work that's going into win projects on behalf of the firm. And that is usually the managing director, or I would use creative director and design director interchangeably. Usually that's one and the same. And the principal of the company will be out pitching for work, which means you might do a little work before you win the work. And you're sharing your ideas, you're talking about your process, your team. Someone says, great, we want to hire you. You're going to work on our project. One of the first things that I think is really important, and I'll talk more about it later, is doing a project kickoff. So the creative director or the design director is really there to form the vision for the design and to ensure that everyone stays aligned with that vision throughout the process. And so in those initial phases of the project, they're going to be helping the entire team kind of orient around what's the framework for this project? What's the budget? What's the schedule? Who are the clients? What are their goals? Who's the audience? Who's going to be coming to this? Now, obviously, residential, my background is in hospitality, so I tend to think a bit broader about the audience, but it's the same for residential. Who's living there? What do they like to do? Do they have kids? So you're taking all this information in, and through that intake, you're starting to formulate kind of parameters to design within, because designing on a blank slate is like one of the worst things to, I think it's too open-ended. You need some kind of boundaries to then start saying, okay, now this is the sandbox we're going to play in. So a creative director or design director is helping to start to shape that. The managing director can also play a role in helping set up those early stages of the project. And then from there, projects are generally broken into phases. And I have a slide in here, so I'll wait to go through that so you can see the different phases of a project. But the designers might be engaged through every phase. You might come in just for concept and schematic, and then someone else might take it through design development. So that's where it's different firm to firm. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to give these young minds an idea of what they might be experiencing first thing if they get into the firm.
Yeah, yeah. So generally, you are going to be one of many on a large team, or it could be a smaller team. It depends on the scale of the project. But I'll show you through this kind of how to help get clarity on what your role is on the project. So I just threw this example in. I actually just got back from Oaxaca 2 days ago. And this, I thought, was such a great example of how values drive design. So this restaurant, Criollo, was designed by Javier Sanchez, who's a pretty notable architect in Mexico. Beautiful restaurant, was really impressed with the design. But when you walk in, one of the things you see in the very beginning, basically where the hostess stand would be, is this beautiful area where they're preparing food and making tortillas. And so one of their values is the artistry of Oaxacan cuisine. And so they're not going to miss a moment for that. You walk in and you're immediately immersed in the food preparation. And throughout the restaurant, there's these sorts of displays where you're really engaged in the process, and you can see all of the ingredients on display. To me, this says, okay, they value the art of their cuisine, of culinary, of the culinary arts, and they're sharing it with you. If you didn't, the kitchen might be in the back somewhere that you're never going to get to go into, and you'll never see any of the ingredients until it's on your plate. So you can see how these kind of nuances of being really clear about what you value and what you want to share with your customer or with your audience really drives even the layout and the floor plan. So I'll pause there for a second just as this kind of sinks in. Is there does this prompt any, what do you, values that you have and how those might be shaping some of the projects that you're working on? Anyone have any they can think of or are coming to mind?
So one big value that we talk about a lot in the classes is sustainability.
Uh-huh.
It's on, I think, pretty much everybody's mind, or it should be. But we find that in the professional world, you're often driven by budgets.
Yes.
And sustainability kind of takes a back seat. Have you had any experience how to drive that point forward, a real essential value to a designer, and how they can get a client inspired and get behind that vision?
Yeah. So the question is, if sustainability is a value, how to really get the client supportive and inspired by that, bringing value to the project. It's a tricky one. It is one of those things it's talked a lot about in theory. And sometimes projects want to have LEED certification because it's either required or it's going to add some kind of value proposition to the project. I think it's really in the nuances of how it gets executed. And so sometimes it doesn't even have to be that overt that they have to buy into it. If you as a designer, if that's important to you, build your network and your resources around that. There's a lot of people doing great sustainable practices in craftsmanship and in furniture making and in all these ways that don't have to be as grand as kind of this big vision for the project, and bring those resources to the table because they're people you believe in and you believe in the work that they're doing. your resources become very important as a designer. I mean, no one, no firm is going to hand those to you. They have people that they like to work with, but everyone wants to work with someone new. So the more you can say, hey, you know what, I know someone who's doing really great work. They're, you know, supporting local women, or they're using local materials, and I think this would be a great resource for the project. That's hugely valuable to the team. So my second here is creativity is emotional, no matter what anyone says, that it tends to kind of hit us at our core. And emotional intelligence is, you know, the use of thoughts and feelings and intuition to help solve problems. And I think